she's a dinosaur. Events have passed her over. The last time anybody did stuff like that on a major, that had major ramifications, it was when Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin pranced around in front of Congress. I think it was in 2022. And they gave the nation lectures on Professor Kendi's book on what they called that trifecta of white rage, white privilege, and white supremacy, and that they were going to ferret it out. They were playing for the Democratic members of the Congress. And then they issued the promised a report. The report, of course, came out. I think it was released sometime the next December on a Friday night. Found nothing. But the point they did is they destroyed recruitment for about 3 years, 4 years. In other words, forget what the generals and admirals said. It wasn't fatness, drugs, tattoos, gangs, competition from business. It was the attack on a rural, middle-class, working, white male profile who, as I always say, died twice their numbers in the demographic in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so they didn't want to join. In fact, there's about 3 or 4 peer-reviewed articles that the shortfall in military recruitment was almost entirely 90% attributable to that group. Not gays, not women, not Latinos, not black, that group. And so when people on CNN who have about a 500,000 person audience keep doing that, I guess they're going to get an audience of self-hating white elites and mostly self-hating, white-hating minority elites, because they're sure not going to get anybody on there when they see this guy and he's walking across Manhattan with a gun and he's obviously African American.
Media today goes beyond reporting facts. It crafts divisive narratives to fit a preferred racial storyline. Aaron Burnett's effort to label a clearly African-American shooter as possibly white exemplifies this distortion. Such intentional skewing diminishes trust in journalism and fans the flames of social division. It's a strategic manipulation that prioritizes grievance over truth, ultimately fracturing society's ability to agree on basic facts. This trend in media erodes the foundation for meaningful dialogue and fuels a cynical, polarized public.
But I got a PhD as a white male at Stanford. I got it in 1975. There were 4 other white males in the class, and they had asked us first year to come in and sign an affidavit and said, this is 1975 when I entered, you will not get a job. Please sign, we are not legally culpable. That's what they said, the department. I signed it. And when I graduated, I applied to 17 jobs, and I had my thesis finished, which is odd at 25. And there was a very famous historian, Emilio Gabo, was looking at it to publish, and he did publish it a year or 2 later. But my point is this, I got form letters. I didn't even get... At the American Philological Association, I think I had 3 interviews, and one person from the Naval Academy just said, "We're not going to hire you." I said, "Why?" He said, "You did a great interview. We need to get a classicist that has a military history background. You're about the only one in the entire pool who writes about ancient warfare. That's exactly what we're looking. But we're looking for a woman, and we're going to hire a woman. And if you repeat this, I'm going to deny it." And I said, "Well, why did you tell?" "I'm telling you for your own good. Don't sit by your mailbox in Central California. I think you're going to get a letter." That's what he said. And he was right. And so, I talked to all these guys. One of the most brilliant people in that program was Larry Woodlock. He was a brilliant philologist, and he just said, "This is not going to work, so I'm going to go to law school." Another person who came from the steel mills of Ohio and had trouble in graduate school, he just quit. And then I just came back, and I was lucky. Jefferson said a farm is always a refuge for failure. So I came back. I remember the first week, a guy, I called him Mad Dog. He was crazy. He was a Mexican guy. He goes, "Victor, you go all the way to school on the coast, and here you are pruning. You're working like us. You should have just stayed put. You make no more money than I do." I said, I I want to correct that. I make less than you do because we're losing money. So be honest. But it embitters people. And then I applied to Cal State Fresno, and there was an older professor. His name was Elmer Naj. He was a German and Latin teacher. He said, I'm going to stay here for 6 years, and when I go, we're going to hire a woman. So there's no chance you'll ever come to Cal State nearby your farm. And that's just the way it was. When I hired Bruce Thornton, the dean, I won't mention his name, I was the head of the committee. He had a wonderful teaching record. He already had a book published, and he said to me, you're not going to hire this white male. I'm not going to waste this position on him. I said, he's got a great teaching. He's got teaching, but I don't care. You're not going to do it. And I said, well, you do your worst, and I'll do my best, and we'll see who wins. And we did hire him, but it was only through contortions and something. But my point is, I'm trying to say is, Jack, is that all of us went through that whole period, and then we were insulted by telling us, well, there was no prejudice, there was no non-meritocratic, it was just diversity, and you guys had it all made your way. And I'm thinking, no, the people who had it all their way were the people that were hiring us in their 60s and 70s and came of age in the 1950s and 60s, when there were hardly any minorities in the gene pool and there was very little competition, and you could get hired as a professor, ABD, all but dissertation, almost within 3 years of going to graduate, and they were mediocre. So when I would be interviewed by people, they wouldn't have any books, or my colleagues had no books, no publication. They were white, but yet they were lecturing everybody why we had to be diverse. And I'd always say the same thing to them. Why don't you resign? Step down and let somebody who's diverse have your place. It was a whole rotten system. And what I'm getting on this tangent, Jack, is that when somebody does that, this is a vestigial incident. There's no support anymore from anybody for racial preferences and for racial chauvinism, and all these dinosaurs think they can get away with it. But look at The View, look at the careers of Joy Reid, look at the careers of Don Lemon, look at the careers of all these race hustlers. They're going nowhere.
Yeah, but do you think the prehistoric DEI, so we're going on 50 years of DEI from your own experience.
At least.
So it's not going to hit a brick wall and die overnight. Do you think 10 years from now, the hiring will still be sort of akin to what you yourself went through?
You know why? It's starting to affect left-wing people. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Left-wing people who are wealthy and are from the right zip codes. Once the DEI came and trumped affirmative action, and it changed the selection processes so that it wasn't just middle-class white kids from Bakersfield or Dayton, Ohio who couldn't get a job, but it started to affect them. So my point with all this, these excursus rants, whatever we call them, is there were a lot of people over the last 50 years, not necessarily me, although I felt that affirmative action had hurt my career, but I was solidly middle class. But there were people who were not solidly middle class, especially where I grew up as part of an area where the Oklahoma diaspora is kind of settled, poor people from the South that were white and in many cases did not have the means of people who were non-white, and yet they were discriminated against and their lives were changed by it. And the white elites that were not affected because they had the means, the zip codes, the networking to circle around affirmative actions, at least until lately. Lately, when you have 9% of white males at Stanford admitted, you can be very wealthy and very connected, and there's not enough room for your kid, and now they're turning on DEI. But that's my point, Jack, is that I think that DEI has a record of a lot of people angry at it, and it was like sort of a rotten door, and it looks really pretty, and then somebody kicks it, and it shatters.
Decades of affirmative action and diversity efforts in academia have created a system where merit is often sidelined for identity. This has real consequences, not only for those excluded unjustly, but for institutional quality and morale. Personal stories like Hanson's of systemic hiring preferences reveal a legacy of resentment and frustration. DEI initiatives have morphed from remedies to sources of division, making reforms painful but necessary. The system's imperfections fuel anger from all sides, and cleaning up the damage will require honesty and patience. If you value honest analysis and real conversations, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. What did we miss, and what should we tackle next? Your voice makes this community stronger. Let's keep pushing for the truth together.